Chapter 251 The Real Pirate. The hot speed of light kicked infinitely close behind the head, and the exaggerated penetrating power even made the air explode into circles of white cyclones. What a sinister kid. The corner of the golden lion's mouth suddenly raised a hideous smile, and his head suddenly tilted to the left. Borsalino's white leather shoes brushed past his hair, and the high-temperature beam of light suddenly sank into the earth. Boom! A military fortress suddenly exploded, and black smoke rose in the sky-high flames, and the hot explosion airwaves suddenly spread. The timing is very good, but the move is a little slow. Golden Lion laughed loudly, turned around and swung his sword. The golden sword light pierced Borsalino's body, and slashed towards the distant sea like a huge crescent moon. The moment the figure turned into photons and dissipated, the distant sea was silently cut open with a crack several kilometers long, and then filled with surging sea water in an instant. Did it transform into an element in advance? Golden Lion said disdainfully, and the strong wind above his head suddenly approached. I saw Darren had come to his head like a ghost, and his right foot was raised above his head. The strong wind in the sky messed up the black hair of the Commodore, and a wide snow-white cloak danced wildly. The solemn domineering aura covered the military boots, and it fell heavily like a battle axe. The Golden Lion's expression remained unchanged, and he held his two swords in front of him. Clang! The military boots and the two swords collided heavily, splashing a large number of sparks. Ha ha ha, Darren, your strength and domineering are stronger than before. The Golden Lion held Darren's right foot firmly with his two swords, and his eyes burst into a murderous intent, laughing crazily. Darren opened his eyes wide, gritted his teeth, and all the strength of his body was exerted through his waist, pouring all on this kick. Get down from me. Boom. The second burst of armed color domineering and physical strength, the airwaves suddenly exploded in the sky. The Golden Lion's figure fell rapidly to the ground like a meteorite. At his landing point, Kuzan and Sakaski were each bathed in ice and magma, their fists bulged, and they attacked at the same time. Ha 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 ha. Is this how you guys work together? The Golden Lion adjusted his posture flexibly in midair, laughed loudly, and swung his sword with both hands at the same time. Clang, clang. The Sakura 10, in his left hand firmly resisted the hot lava fist, and the dead wood, in his right hand shattered the cold frozen fist. The majestic air waves intertwined with each other, and Sakaski and Kuzan's eyes were bloodshot, pushing their own devil fruit abilities to the extreme. Boom, boom. The red lava and the bluish-white ice curtain rose from the ground at the same time, with the legendary pirate between the two as the dividing point, presenting a clear-cut giant column. The two abilities with a huge difference in temperature, mixed with the invisible armed color domineering, formed opposing hemispherical cyclones, and they madly pressed towards the Golden Lion. Ha 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 ha, too far away. If you want to kill me, you'd better let Sengoku and Garp come together. The Golden Lion laughed wildly, and invisible waves of domineering air burst out from his body, forming a transparent cyclone, completely isolating the red and blue colors from the outside, and unable to invade at all. There are more than two of us. Kuzan roared with a flushed face. At this moment, a golden light streak suddenly whizzed past the ground. The light and shadow quickly gathered into a human figure, and Borsalino flew almost close to the ground, and in an instant he came to the Golden Lion's eyes. He put his hands together and dragged out a dazzling golden long sword. Aim no Murakumo sword. Borsalino held the sword in one hand and slashed it head-on at the Golden Lion in front of him. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. Everything in front of him became slow. The burning golden sword of light, in the reflection of the Golden Lion's pupils, it continued to grow larger. Suddenly. Boom. An indescribable terrifying momentum burst out from the center of the three people, rising into the sky and piercing the clouds. Sakaski, Kuzan and Borsalino only felt that the space in their vision seemed to collapse, and the air was like a broken mirror, with cracks constantly appearing, causing their movements to stagnate. In an instant, the entire island was completely covered by black and red light at this moment, and the overwhelming domineering aura of the king made the space stagnate. The sound of crackling broke the eardrums, and black and red lightning appeared in the void, constantly appearing and disappearing. Sakaski's pupils shrank. Kuzan changed color in horror. As if something was broken in the void, a circle of vast ripples whistled out, carrying fine lightning, entwining the golden lion's double swords, sweeping in all directions. The entanglement of the domineering color of the king stirred up boundless power, bursting out a black and red air wave, and hit Sakaski and Kuzan's chest heavily. Hit in the air. Both of them spit out a pool of blood at the same time and flew out. Ha 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 ha. The golden lion laughed crazily. Ding! A sharp sound that was almost explosive sounded, and the two famous swords, Sakura 10, and Dead Wood, overlapped at the same time, barely blocking the lightsaber cut down by Borsellino. Pululisano's pupils under the sunglasses shrank slightly, looking at the golden lion in front of him, who was wrapped in black and red lightning and had reached the highest point of momentum, like a ghost. A drop of cold sweat slid down his forehead. His movements were not slow at all. The moment the lightsaber was blocked, his left foot dragged the golden light and kicked towards the abdomen of the golden lion. Yellow-skinned kid, your kicking skills are far from good enough. Facing Borsellino's kick that was known as light speed, the golden lion did not give in and kicked out the same kick. However, unlike Borsellino's kicking skills wrapped in golden light, the golden lion's kick kicked out black and red lightning. The entanglement of the domineering color of the king. He actually wrapped the domineering color of the king in his kicking skills. Bang! The 2 feet collided, making a dull sound, mixed with the sound of bones breaking. Borsellino's forehead was covered with more cold sweat, and the whole person was kicked out by the golden lion, turning into a golden light that sank into the central military fortress in the distance, and blasted a huge hole in the thick city wall. The blazing flames rose, and the black smoke billowed. The strong wind was surging, and the black and red lightning was raging. Almost at the same second that the golden lion kicked Borsellino away, a sharp and violent gust of wind fell on his head, and the surrounding air pressure changed because of the 3-fingered dragon claw that tore through the black smoke. It was Darren. The surging domineering aura surged out of his body, and he resisted the impact of the golden lion's aura. His movements were as fast as lightning, and the dragon claw the fist roared like thunder. The only flaw. Dragon claw. A claw fell. Carrying Darren's inhuman power, it fell like a meteor. Is it really that simple? Golden Lion smiled grimly and hooked his finger. A huge tsunami rose up from the ground under his feet, instantly covering his head and flooding Darren at the same time. Even if Darren caught the only flaw in the close combat, Golden Lion was able to break it in time with the power of the fruit. Boom boom boom. A huge amount of mud kept colliding in the air, making a shocking sound. The next moment, a sword light wrapped in black and red lightning suddenly shot through everything and soared into the sky. The figure of the Commodore flew out of the rolling mud and rocks, and a deep sword scar on his chest was added. Under the shocked gazes of everyone, the earth's torrents flowed back like the sea, gathering into a lion that could hold up the sky. On the top of the giant, the golden lion held 2 swords in his hands, and his long golden hair like a lion's mane danced wildly in the air. He looked down at the 4 monsters, who were gasping for breath on the ground from a high place, and laughed grimly. You little Navy kids who grew up in a greenhouse don't know how terrifying real pirates are. Ha 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 ha. Under the dark night, black and red lightning kept surging. The big pirate, who was higher than the sky, cast a huge shadow that kept jumping on the ground, almost covering the entire Marineford. Add more, ask for everything, grateful. Chapter 252 Transaction. The storm roared wildly, and black and red lightning kept flashing. The golden lion Shiki stood above the sky of Marineford, laughing arrogantly, like a ghost. The ground was filled with smoke and flames. There were piles of corpses underfoot, and broken limbs were buried in the ruins. The Navy and the people in the civilian area far away looked at the figure with shock and horror, trembling and standing still, with an indescribable despair gradually spreading in their eyes. On this day, the world once again witnessed the horror of those pirates named Legend. The battlefield was far away. Are you so worried about your students? Zephyr. Big Katakana Middle. Mom caught the moment when Zephyr was distracted, grinned, held the huge long sword burning with flames, and slashed it down with great force. Napoleon Katakana Middle. Emperor sword. The extremely hot and sharp breath rushed to the face, almost burning the air and distorting it. The bicorn Napoleon, wrapped with the sun Prometheus, this knife has completely turned into a weapon that burns everything, and every slash can emit high-temperature flames. Damn it! Zeph's pupils shrank slightly, and he cursed in his heart, and his hands covered with armed color domineering folded in front of his chest. Boom! The surging flames turned into a cyclone and spread out, turning the area of dozens of meters into a burning sea of fire. Zeph's figure shot out from the sea of fire, and his military boots plowed 2 long traces on the charred ground. But before he could catch his breath, the bursting wind had already torn the air pressure above his head, and the hurricane and thunder crushed down. Oh, it's a flaw. Kaido in the form of a dragon man had a violent red eye and fell from the sky with a grin. He held the spiked black mace with both hands at the same time, and bundles of black and red lightning sprayed and dragged along with the swinging action, and his long black hair danced like a long snake. Die, retired old man, you should just lie on the ground. One stick, falling like a meteorite. The third generation, induce Naraku. A flash of anger flashed in Zephyr's eyes. Kaido's attack was as fast as thunder, and it was entangled with the domineering aura, making it extremely difficult to deal with. Although the strength of the domineering aura was far inferior to that of Shiki the Golden Lion, if he went head-on, he would suffer more or less. His eyes suddenly flashed red, and the observation domineering aura was driven to the extreme at this moment, predicting what was about to happen. At the critical moment, Zeph's feet stomped suddenly, and his figure suddenly changed position on the ground. The stick entangled with thunder fell sideways with his cloak. The mace and the 8 precepts sank deeply into the earth. Boom! A ground-shaking blow. The black and red lightning mixed with the terrifying air waves spread out instantly, radiating a range of thousands of meters. Within the hundreds of meters centered on the point where Kaido's mace landed, the ground structure suddenly collapsed 1 meter deep, and then tore dozens of shocking cracks, and countless rocks flew up. The attack that was sure to win failed, and Kaido's eyes clearly flashed a trace of surprise. Kaido, kid, pure power is important, but you are still too young. A furious cold shout exploded from the thick dust. The next moment, a rough arm with a pitch-black body suddenly emerged from the thick smoke, and quickly approached in the reflection of Kaido's shrinking pupils. Zephyr's fierce tiger-like figure smashed through countless rocks and dust, and his rough big hand opened its 5 fingers and suddenly grabbed Kaido's head. This guy. Kaido's heart was shocked. When he was in real close combat, he sincerely felt the terrifying oppression brought to him by this ordinary former admiral in front of him. The ultimate skills, the calm and tenacious armed color domineering, and countless bloody battles and fights. The perfect fighting instinct and rich experience from countless battlefields. It was like a towering mountain, lying in front of him. Even if he had strong power and domineering, he could not cross it. Zeph gritted his teeth, his eyes under the sunglasses were instantly filled with bloodshot, and he roared with all his might. The one who should lie on the ground is you. One hand pressed down hard. Boom. Kaido's head collided with the ground closely, and the cracked ground structure completely collapsed. The rumbling sound continued to sound as the ground collapsed like ripples. Rocks flew up. Blood flowed out of Kaido's mouth and nose, and the pair of dragon pupils showed a tendency to slightly disperse, and stars appeared in his eyes. Ma ma ma. At this moment, another sharp laugh came from the top of his head. Mom rushes. Big Katakana Middle. Mom's tall and graceful figure turned flexibly in the air, and in the blink of an eye, she came to Zeph's eyes, holding the knife with both hands and slashing fiercely. Dang! Zephyr raised his hand to block, and a large number of sparks splashed in front of his eyes. He gritted his teeth and flew back. Zephyr couldn't help but curse inwardly when he felt a burst of numbness and pain in his arm. Whether it was Big Katakana Middle. Mom or Kaido, the body structure of these two guys was inhuman, even surpassing that of adult giant warriors, and they were extremely difficult to deal with. Fortunately, Although Kaido has reached the level of admiral-level combat power in terms of hard power, his fighting and domineering levels are not strong, at least not as good as Big Katakana Middle Mom. It's just that the physique and recovery ability of these two guys are too amazing, and Zephyr can't help but feel a little restrained. A trace of blood slowly slid down the corner of his mouth. Zephyr stared at Big Katakana Middle Mom carrying a big knife with a gloomy look, and Kaido who was shaking his head and trying to stand up from the deep pit, with his fists clenched tightly. Damn the Navy. It hurts so much. Kaido said in a muffled voice, raised his hand to wipe the blood on his face, and looked at Zephyr with a look full of hostility and viciousness. Well, if you're not dead, stand up quickly, Kaido. Charlotte Katakana Middle Linlin laughed strangely, then looked at Zephyr with a playful look, and pointed in the distance. Zephyr, are you sure you want to waste time with us here? Your precious students won't last long. Let's make a deal. As long as you hand over Darren, I will take him and Kaido away. As soon as the voice came out, before Zephyr could speak, Kaido next to him turned his head in disbelief and said angrily. What are you talking about, crazy woman? I won't listen to your orders. Kaido, don't forget that you still owe me a big favor. Big Katakana Middle Mom sneered. Kaido paused when he heard the words, gritted his teeth, hesitated for a moment, and unexpectedly stopped talking. Big Katakana Middle Mom smiled and looked at Zephyr again. Did you see it? As long as you hand over Darren, Kaido and I will leave. In this way, you can free up your hands to stop that madman Shiki, otherwise, all your students will be killed by him. Don't worry, I won't kill Darren, after all, I can't bear to, such a perfect man. Please help me, thank you very much. Chapter 253 Graduation Exam. The wind blows away the smoke, and the dust dances in the air. Isn't this a very reasonable deal, Zephyr? Big Katakana Middle Mom's eyes under her long eyelashes stared at the former admiral who was breathing slightly in the distance with interest, and she giggled. I won't take Darren's life, I just want him to be my husband. Otherwise, you should know that with the strength of the 4 Navy kids, they will definitely be killed by Shiki if they continue like this. Besides, facing the combination of me and Kaido at the same time, you are almost at your limit, right? Big Katakana Middle Mom looked confident, and her words seemed to have some unique magic, which was very inspiring. She was not very interested in destroying the headquarters of the Navy. This time, she agreed to the suggestion of joining forces with Golden Lion just to take Darren away. But what she didn't expect was that the plan that should have been easy to achieve was hindered by Zephyr, the former Navy admiral. Especially the strength shown by the Navy in front of her, which made Big Katakana Middle Mom feel very difficult. If she and Kaido teamed up to deal with Zephyr alone, they would naturally win if they continued to fight, but it would definitely not be too easy. If Zephyr counterattacked before his death and caused herself to be seriously injured, Big Katakana Middle Mom could not guarantee whether Shiki would take this opportunity to attack her. Although they were once members of the Rocks Pirates, they could barely be regarded as partners, but what kind of friendship and trust do they have between them, only God knows. If they really trusted each other, the Rocks Pirates would not have been destroyed in the Valley of the Gods. The scorching wind whistled across the ruined land. Big Katakana Middle Mom waited with a smile. Kaido's face was uncertain, and the hand holding the mace loosened and tightened and loosened, murderous. But at this time, Zephyr suddenly stopped panting. The cigar had already burned out. He took out another one from his pocket, bit it in his mouth and lit it. No, you don't understand. A smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Zephyr slowly raised his head, took off his cracked sunglasses, revealing a pair of weathered but bright eyes. The dark and solemn armament haki once again flowed like water, surrounding his arms and covering him. The reason why monsters are called monsters is because each of them has talents and resilience that are not inferior to any of you. Zephyr took a deep breath, straightened his chest, and opened his dark arms. At the moment of his momentum, the wide navy cloak behind him fluttered without wind. Sakazuki. He took a step forward. Boom. A blood-red magma column suddenly shot up into the sky from the distant battlefield, as if responding to his voice. Zephyr continued to take a step forward. Pelusolino. A golden light whizzed across the land. Kuzan. The extremely cold frost slowly spread across the land of the distant battlefield, and the ice crystals sparkled. Zephyr spoke a name with every step he took, and his tone and eyes became more and more firm with every name he spoke, filled with infinite trust. Andarin. At this time, a figure slowly stood up from the distant land, with black hair fluttering and a fierce momentum. Zeph's pace became faster and faster, and he began to run, charging towards Big Katakana Middle. Mom and Kaido. With every step he took, a deep pit exploded in the ground beneath his feet, and his momentum rose steadily. It was obviously just a one-man charge, but there was a sense of grandeur of thousands of troops. The young people who were dubbed monsters, and the new generation who fought for justice. Zeph laughed loudly, and the corners of his mouth, biting the cigar, raised a fierce arc. They have never been flowers in a greenhouse. In the perception of observation hockey, pictures are so clearly presented in his mind. Dion who chopped the soul monster with one sword. Keiku violently dismantled. The blazing fire of the mountain. The cold hunting ghost spider. The big opening and closing of Doberman. The skillful Dalmesia. Young bloody figures are rushing towards the enemy in front of them one after another, just like their predecessors, bravely holding the sword, guarding the land under their feet and the home behind them. Every one of them is fighting, they are the future of the Navy. Zeph laughed heartily. As their teacher, I have never doubted their strength. Stripe of blood quickly crawled around Zeph's pupils, he grinned and roared. Justice. There is no room for compromise and transaction. Originally, I was thinking of preparing some sea missions for their graduation exams, but now I've just saved myself the trouble. In the blink of an eye, he roared in front of Big Mom and Kaido, and his black arms blasted out at the same time like cannonballs, piercing through the air and exploding a circle of purple-black air waves. This war is their graduation exam. Boom. A huge dust wave rushed up into the sky. A landslide-like vibration came from afar, and the ground under his feet was filled with tremors. Darren stood up straight, frowned, and subconsciously glanced in the direction of Teacher Zepha. Have we entered the final decisive battle? Teacher Zepha is 44 years old, and his physical functions and combat capabilities are still at their peak. With his powerful armed color domineering, it should not be a big problem to intercept Big Katakana Middle. Mom in a short time. After all, Kaido was less than 30 years old at this time, and he was still in the rising period of combat power, far from reaching the level of the peak 4 emperors in later generations. Don't be stunned, that old man is very tough. A low and hoarse voice came from the left. Sakazuki walked slowly out of the magma fire column, staring coldly at the golden lion in the air. Bubbles came out of his whole arm, and the magma was boiling. Our opponent is this guy. His words seemed to pop out from between his teeth, like cold nails piercing the air, revealing an indescribable murderous intent. It seems that this time, we really have to fight to the death. To the right, Kuzan, whose half of his body turned into ice, spit out a visible chill. His eyes no longer had the playfulness and second-year mentality of the past, but were replaced by a light that was even colder than the ice. After all, he is a legendary pirate. Borsalino's slow voice came from behind. The playful smile on his face was the same as before, but it revealed an inexplicable coldness. It's terrible that you broke my calf with a kick. The right leg of the white suit was stained red with blood. Looking at the different expressions of the three people, Darren was slightly startled. He soon laughed. These three guys, all serious now. Then, he raised his head and smiled at the golden lion in the air, his eyes full of hostility. Congratulations, Golden Lion, you have successfully angered all 4 of us. Stripes of blue electric arcs jumped up on the surface of the Commodore. Now starts the second round. I'm grateful for everything. Chapter 254, Broken Shackles. Hearing Darren's words, the corners of the golden lion's mouth subconsciously raised a mocking arc, wanting to speak sarcastically. But the next second his eyebrows twisted up. Because of the eyes. The eyes of the 4 Navy kids. All changed. Suddenly. Ice ball. Kuzan took the lead, raised his hand and shot out several white ice pillars, shooting towards the golden lion. The extremely cold air rushed towards him, and a flash of red light flashed in the pupils of the golden lion. His observation haki instantly predicted the attack position of the icicle. Ha ha ha, this trick is useless to me. His body tilted to the right, and several icicles whizzed past his clothes. But the next moment, the smile on the golden lion's face suddenly froze. With Kuzan's cold shout, the icicles that passed by suddenly exploded into ice crystals all over the sky. The ice crystals continued to grind into surging and spreading freezing air. The surrounding air began to condense into frost visibly, and covered the body and clothes of the golden lion, and continued to spread. The biting cold came from the skin, almost penetrating every pore, making the blood flow stagnant. The golden lion frowned, and the spiral cyclone of armed color haki spread from the body, quickly dispelling the cold air that invaded the muscles. At this moment, a golden light suddenly flew into the sky. The dazzling golden light suddenly shone brightly in the dark sky, and the world seemed to have entered daylight from darkness at this moment. Borsellino opened his arms in the sky, clenched his hands into orchid fingers, and his body was completely bathed in the golden light. Yasukani no Magatama. As soon as the voice fell, the sky full of light bullets, wrapped in the scorching destructive power, poured down overwhelmingly. The golden lion raised his eyebrows, and his figure dived from the spot like a flying lion, constantly dodging the storm of light bullets at an astonishing speed. At this moment, dozens of fixed heavy artillery on the surrounding land suddenly turned the direction of the barrels and fired wildly at the flight path of the golden lion. The sky was invaded by dense light bullets like rain, and all the paths ahead were completely blocked by the firepower of the shells. The golden lion gritted his teeth, and his figure suddenly paused, and his two swords slashed out a sharp sword light. Lion Chikiri ya. Swish. Boom. Dozens of golden sword beams whizzed out and shattered everything in an instant. The terrifying cutting force created a vacuum zone, hit the light bombs and artillery, and immediately burst into a huge explosion. The surging flames shot up into the sky, and the residual power of the sword beams swept across the earth. The earth and buildings were silently cut into two parts. Ha 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 ha. I thought you could play some tricks, but I didn't expect it to be such a trick. The figure of the golden lion was looming in the flames and black smoke, and he grinned. If you are at this level, there is no second round at all. As soon as the voice fell, a figure bathed in magma suddenly broke through the black smoke and appeared in front of the golden lion at an unimaginable speed. Sakazuki. The boiling red magma surged on his right arm and expanded instantly, like a volcano ready to go. Seeing Sakazuki appear, a cunning cold light flashed in the violent eyes of the golden lion. The strength of these four navy brats is indeed not to be underestimated. If they cannot be dealt with in a short time, when that bastard Zongguo comes back, he will have no chance. Zzzzzzz. The black and red lightning splashed around the golden lion's body again, instantly wrapping the two swords. Jia ha 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 ha. You are looking for death. One knife cut down. A knife wrapped with domineering. Facing this knife, Sakazuki even seemed to see that everything in front of him was shattered and collapsed inch by inch under this knife, and the space was distorted like chaos, like a broken mirror, constantly cracking. Don't even think about it. If he was hit by this knife with all his strength, he would definitely be seriously injured or even killed on the spot. However, facing the golden lion's knife, Sakazuki's expression under the brim of his military cap did not change at all. His eyes were as cold as ever, as if he had turned a blind eye to the famous sword that was slashing down on him. Golden Lion's pupils shrank. A sense of uneasiness suddenly stirred in his heart. A knife fell. An extremely strange scene appeared. At the moment when the famous knife slashed the air, an invisible defensive membrane seemed to appear in the void, and even the shape of the air being torn appeared visible to the naked eye. An indescribable strange pulling and binding force suddenly enveloped his blade, and Golden Lion felt that the force of his slashing was instantly weakened by at least half. A faint blue arc even bloomed on Yingju's blade. This is... His eyes suddenly widened. The corner of his eyes stared at the Commodore on the ground. The latter raised his hands, with electric light lingering between his fingers, gritting his teeth, and blood gushing out of his nostrils and mouth. It seemed that he had already pushed his devil fruit ability to the extreme at this moment, even overdrawing his own physical strength. Super katakana middle dot overload katakana middle dot magnetic control. Swish. The knife finally fell. Blood spurted up, and the blade wrapped with black and red lightning sank into Sakaski's chest, cutting through the magma and flesh, deep into the bone. Sakaski's face suddenly turned pale. But his cold eyes raised a rebellious fierce light, and the corners of his mouth raised a ferocious arc. The punch that had been accumulated for a long time was wrapped in thunderous speed. Like a volcanic eruption. Hell dog. The magma roared out, the target pointed directly at the head of the golden lion. The pupils of the golden lion instantly shrank into pinholes. He felt the breath of death from the threat brought by this attack. Most importantly, in the perception of the observation hockey, the breath of the Navy kid in front of him seemed to have broken through some shackles at this moment and completely entered a new realm. It's not that easy. The power of the floating fruit exploded, and the golden lion's body was pulled back suddenly. Swish. The erupting magma fist brushed past his chest and almost pierced the golden lion's neck alive. The high-temperature magma directly burned through the latter's skin and flesh, leaving a piece of burnt and blurred flesh on his chest. Ah! Damn magma kid! The golden lion roared in pain, his eyes filled with dense bloodshot, and he held the knife in his backhand. Another famous sword, Dead Wood, was instantly wrapped in black and red lightning, and it was about to cut Sakaski in two. Now! Sakaski's roar was as cold as a devil. As the words came out, a golden light passed through the void. Borsellino's figure suddenly appeared behind Golden Lion, holding the Aim no Kume sword in both hands, and suddenly slashed at Golden Lion's waist. The two people's sword-swinging movements were almost identical, and the speed was not far apart. "Do you think I was slow this time?" Borsellino grinned and said faintly. "Add more, ask for everything." Chapter 255 Earth-Shattering Star. Feeling the hot breath on his back, Golden Lion subconsciously clenched his teeth. The speed of this yellow-skinned kid has indeed become faster. An incredible thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Could it be, this insidious kid has also entered that realm? At the critical moment, Golden Lion did not have any time to think. If he slashed down with this sword, he could indeed seriously injure or even kill the lava ghost, but he would also be pierced through the body by the insidious yellow-skinned ghost. Without any hesitation, the Golden Lion made a decision in an instant. The sword that he slashed down with his backhand suddenly changed his move and blocked Borsellino's Aim no Kume sword. "You retreated." A smile of interest appeared at the corner of Borsellino's mouth. The Golden Lion was startled. Then the dazzling golden light suddenly occupied all his vision. A dazzling light burst out from Borsellino's body, which temporarily blinded the Golden Lion's eyes, and tears could not stop flowing out of his red pupils. "Ah, you were looking for death." After temporarily losing his vision, the Golden Lion roared in anger, and his long golden hair danced wildly. The overwhelming domineering aura, like the collapse of mountains and the splitting of seas, once again erupted from his body, sweeping over every corner of Marineford like an overwhelming force. A strong wind like purgatory blew between heaven and earth, and countless black and red lightnings cut through the void, constantly appearing and disappearing. The earth seemed to have experienced a tsunami, collapsing layer by layer, and cracks continued to tear open huge cracks, as if leading to the abyss. The two closest people, Sakaski and Borsellino, suffered the impact of the domineering aura entangled, and could not help but groan. Their bodies shook violently, and they showed a tendency to elementalization, and they all flew back to distance themselves. Darren stood on the ground and gasped, raising one arm to block the surging air waves that spread in front of him, and his eyes flashed with unprecedented solemnity. The Golden Lion is indeed the top peak powerhouse on this sea. Whether it is swordsmanship, domineering, physical skills, or the ability to respond to battle and fight, it is almost perfect. You know, vision is one of the 5 senses that humans rely on most. Even a trained expert who is good at observation hockey will subconsciously rely on his vision as the basis for attacking in battle. When vision is suddenly deprived, especially in the dangerous moment of life and death, even a human with a strong will as strong as steel will suddenly feel fear in his heart and fall into a short panic and stiffness. But Golden Lion did not. In this dangerous moment when he lost his vision, he relied on his years of fighting instinct and body reaction to burst out his haki again to achieve the purpose of forcing Sakazuki and Borsellino to retreat. It's just, the situation has reversed. Darren's mouth corners suddenly raised, looking forward. I saw Kuzan's figure suddenly fall, kneel on one knee, raise his hand, and slap the ground heavily with cold eyes. Ice. Age. Swish. Silently, everything in front of him turned into a piece of snow white in an instant. If someone from high in the sky looking down, you can clearly see that with Kuzan as the center, the white frost spread outward at an alarming speed. Wherever it passed, whether it was the burning flames of war, the flying rocks, the collapsed military fortresses, or even the bullets and artillery fired from afar, they were all frozen in an instant. Everything in sight turned into solid ice. The ice crystals continued to resist the impact of the Golden Lion's domineering aura, spreading upward like a spiral dance, and then instantly wrapped around the Golden Lion's body. Freeze me. Kuzan's eyes gradually lingered with hideous bloodshot. Blood flowed out of his mouth, nostrils, eyes, and even ears, and veins bulged on his forehead and back of his hands, as if he had driven his devil fruit ability to the extreme. The ice crystals continued to bloom around the Golden Lion's body, stacked and covered, and finally formed a towering iceberg hundreds of meters high. In the crystal-clear iceberg, the angry figure of the Golden Lion is clearly visible, lifelike, like a living ice sculpture. Did it succeed? What a powerful trick. It's worthy of being our headquarters monster. The Navy in the distance saw this scene and murmured in shock. But as soon as the voice fell, a crisp sound of crackling came from the huge iceberg. Snap! Narrow cracks began to develop on the surface of the iceberg, spreading continuously, and becoming more and more dense in the shocked eyes of everyone. In less than 2 seconds, the cracks densely covered the entire iceberg. A stream of black and red arcs burst out from the cracks. Kuzan, whose hands turned into icicles, had eyes that were about to burst. Seeing that he was about to collapse and the Golden Lion was about to break free from the ice with its own domineering power, he gritted his teeth and roared. Darren. There was no need for his shouting, Darren had already taken action. He stood up straight, his eyes wide open, and his arms open. The blue arcs visible to the naked eye began to grow wildly on his body surface, turning into an invisible magnetic field and spreading out. Boom. At this moment, the entire island of Marineford seemed to be shaking and trembling under the influence of some strange force. Rise up for me. Darren's eyes were bleeding and tears were flowing out of his mouth. The magnetic field was boiling and rioting instantly. Under the stunned and shocked eyes of everyone. One after another, artillery batteries. One after another, heavy metal cannons. One after another, steel bars torn from the earth and the ruins of buildings. One after another, swords with broken blades on the battlefield. Countless metal objects, driven by magnetic force, all flew up and shot out. From a distance, the metal in the sky looked like a swarm of black locusts covering the sky and the sun, smashing towards the figure in the iceberg at an astonishing speed. 1, 2, 3, 4. Continuously overlapping, combining, twisting, shrinking. Then slowly rose into the air. In a dead world, a huge sphere made of countless metal components was formed. The sphere had an astonishing diameter of 30 meters, like a small black moon, quietly hovering in the sky. The scene was horrifying and terrifying. Magnetic prison. Darren, with blood all over his face, murmured hoarsely. He raised his arm and clenched the huge black sphere in the air. Instantly, blue arcs of electricity continued to flow on the surface of the black sphere. Under the influence of the magnetic field, countless metal components suddenly tightened again. Let the pits and countless gullies on the surface of the black sphere completely close. Annihilation. A crackling sound came from the depths of the sphere. Dazzling blood seeped out from the cracks and dripped down. Please be grateful for everything. Chapter 256. This is your real hell. There was a dead silence on the battlefield. Silence. The Navy who were fighting with the soul monsters stopped moving, their eyes widened, looking at the huge black sphere in the sky that was constantly squeezing blood. Their expressions were extremely shocked. Blood continued to seep out from the tiny cracks of the huge sphere, and soon dyed its surface dark red, which looked extremely terrifying. Did it work? Such a powerful move. Definitely dead. I guess even the bones were crushed into pieces. It's not just them. Big Mom and Kaido, who were suppressing Zephyr in the distance, also had a look of surprise on their faces, and a huge wave of emotions was stirred in their hearts. The combination of those Navy brats could actually fight against the Golden Lion. But at this moment, trample, tramp, tramp. Heavy footsteps sounded, and in the eyes of everyone who was tightly contracted, a bloody figure with blood all over his body suddenly jumped up from the ground. There was a deep-cut scar on his chest that could be seen through the bone, and the blood gushing out of it dyed his military uniform red. The blood-stained cloak of justice behind him was waving endless iron and blood. The blood-red rose on his chest, swayed in the wind and smoke, with the most solemn and beautiful beauty. Sakazuki. Go to hell, Golden Lion Shiki. Shouting loudly like an evil spirit, Sakazuki's eyes burst out with a terrifying murderous intent, and his entire right arm instantly expanded and emitted a large amount of black smoke, and the magma fist that burned everything exploded. A blow of volcanic eruption. The exploding red magma, like a huge fireball, pierced through the blood moon in the air. He didn't need to confirm whether the Golden Lion that was hit by Darren's move was dead or alive. As long as everything was burned to ashes with magma, it would be over. Big fire. A punch fell. The red air wave suddenly expanded, causing the surrounding air to become distorted under the extremely high temperature. But at this moment, a bunch of black and red lightning suddenly penetrated from the bleeding black sphere, directly tearing the highly compressed metal sphere into fragments all over the sky. Two peerless swords wrapped with domineering aura, posing a savage posture of delivering swords, as if dragging black and red thunder, piercing through the metal fragments in the sky, and meeting Sakazuki's punch. Boom! The magma fist and the two swords collided violently in midair, and circles of violent air waves spread out in all directions with the two people as the center. The broken earth was like an ocean raising waves, and layers were lifted up. The crowd finally saw the state of the Golden Lion at this time. The skin all over his body was damaged in a large area, blood dripped down, his expression was painful and hideous, and his eyes were cruel like a ghost. His body was surrounded by countless black and red lightning, and his domineering aura was still magnificent and boundless, but in the perception of the domineering aura of observation, his aura was obviously weakened by at least half. Seriously injured. You damned brats. Actually pushed me to this extent. Golden Lion's resentful voice was wrapped in cold murderous intent, and his pupils were densely filled with bloodshot. I will never let you go. View. A golden laser beam suddenly shot through his abdomen, passed through his back, sank into the sea in the distance, and exploded the seawater. Golden Lion's whole body stiffened, and he vomited a mouthful of blood. He turned his head suddenly, staring at Borsellino not far away with eyes full of hatred. The latter sat on the ground without any posture, his back against the wall, grinning weakly, and his index finger remained raised. I'm so sorry, I'm so tired that I can't move, so I can only use this method. Damn it! Golden Lion roared in pain, and slashed down fiercely with the double swords wrapped in the domineering aura of the king. Swish! Like a giant's blood-red whip, the Golden Lion's sword slashed out a black-red blade light that was 100 meters long, slashing Sakazuki into the earth. With a bang. Half of the naval port was split in half by the black-red blade light, the earth shook violently, dozens of buildings collapsed one after another, and countless dust and rubble were raised. After slashing out with the sword, the Golden Lion's face suddenly turned pale, and his figure staggered back a few meters, with blood pouring out of his mouth uncontrollably. After being severely injured many times, and with Borsellino's laser piercing his abdomen, he clearly felt that his physical condition was constantly declining. How can I He felt that his vision began to blur, his eyelids were stained red with blood, and he coughed violently. But his ghost-like eyes were fixed on Darren, who was crumbling in the center of the ruins. The latter's face was as pale as paper, and it was obvious that he had reached his limit and was at the end of his strength. "It's all you." Take a deep breath, and the chill of killing burst out in the eyes of the Golden Lion. "You must be killed. Shiki." But at this moment, a furious roar suddenly exploded from the sea. The Golden Lion paused. This powerful voice made the Navy react and look towards the sea. A huge warship was speeding on the sea at a very fast speed, breaking through the waves with great momentum. All the baggage, artillery and even some railings on the warship have been dismantled, and the engine is turned to the maximum, clearly to achieve the maximum speed. A burly figure with golden light all over his body stood at the bow of the warship, looking at the almost ruined Marineford with cracked eyes, and black and red lightning faintly bloomed around his body. The Admiral of the Navy Headquarters. Buddha's Warring States. Behind Zhang, two strange figures wearing pale silk robes and strange masks stood there silently. Members of the highest intelligence agency of the world government. CP0. "You can't run away," Zhang said angrily, releasing his own momentum unscrupulously. Golden Lion's pupils shrank instantly, and his brain started to work rapidly. With his current poor physical condition, if he was entangled by Zhang. "No, Zhang has no flying ability. I can easily retreat at any time." But at the moment when this thought came up, Golden Lion suddenly glanced at Darren. The Commodore stood there looking at him, with a faint sneer on his lips. Somehow, seeing the sneer on the corner of the Navy kid's mouth, Golden Lion suddenly had an uneasy premonition in his heart. Could it be, this kid has any tricks? No, even if he has any tricks, it's useless. He has 3 top combat forces on his side. Kaido and Linlin are still in their prime. Even if they really fight, where are they? Golden Lion seemed to have sensed something, and turned his head to see a scene that almost cracked his pupils. With the appearance of Sengoku and CP0, Kaido and Big Katakana Mom, who were originally fighting fiercely with Zephyr, left Zephyr without even looking at him. One turned into a dragon, and the other stepped on thunderclouds. Flying directly into the sky, retreating decisively. These 2 damn bastards. Golden Lion almost bit his teeth to pieces. It's too late. Such a thought suddenly flashed through his mind, and Golden Lion gritted his teeth helplessly, and his figure suddenly floated up. In this case, after floating to a very high altitude, Golden Lion, covered in blood, looked down at the devastated Navy headquarters from a high place. With the retreat of Big Katakana Mom, huge soul monsters lost control, and as their souls disappeared, they turned into a pile of stone and steel and collapsed. On the dusty ground, countless seriously wounded Marines stood there panting, holding their swords on the ground. Figures slowly stood up. Darren, Kuzan, Borsellino, and Sakazuki who crawled out of the cracks in the ground. The 4 of them stood at the front of the Marines, lined up in a row, and looked at the Golden Lion with a defiant look. The eyes collided in the air, and sparks seemed to burst out in the void. The corner of the Golden Lion's mouth suddenly raised a mocking grin. "Naive Marines, do you think you won?" As soon as these words came out, the warring states on the warship seemed to have noticed something, and his face suddenly changed. "Ha ha ha ha." The Golden Lion raised his head and laughed crazily. "Open your eyes and see." He waved his hand suddenly. "This is your real hell." After the words fell, a dull rumble suddenly came from behind the clouds. Could it be? All the Navy looked stunned, and then widened their eyes, looking horrified, as if they had seen some horrifying scene. A huge black shadow gradually spread from behind the thick sea of clouds. Then, swish! The dark sea of clouds was smashed and disintegrated layer by layer, constantly retreating farther and farther. The shadow that covered the sky and the sun suddenly towered over the sky, almost covering half of Marineford. Endless fear spread rapidly like a virus. That was an island. Seeking all support, thank you very much. Chapter 257 Mantis trying to stop a chariot. The whole world was dead silent. Everyone held their breath involuntarily, looking horrified. Boom boom. The dull roar in the air gradually became louder and soon deafening. This is impossible. This can't be true. An island. The floating island. Can we, really survive? This is, a force that can destroy the world. The huge shadow was hanging over most of Marineford, covering the entire sky, and the unprecedented haze spread over everyone's heads bit by bit. Tens of thousands of Navy officers in the entire Navy headquarters looked up with dull expressions, looking at the huge island that was gradually falling in the sky, and their bodies trembled involuntarily. With a clang, the saber in the hand of a young Navy soldier fell to the ground. There were crisp sounds one after another. The sabers in the hands of the Navy fell to the ground, their eyes were filled with indescribable fear, and their faces were pale. They stood blankly in the ruins, their eyes out of focus, like puppets without souls in the wind, motionless. Even the weak-willed female Navy soldiers fell to their knees and burst into tears. That was an island. Once it fell, the entire Marineford would probably be completely razed to the ground, or even sink into the sea. Faced with such a power that could destroy the world, fighting or fleeing had lost all meaning. And in the direction of the civilian area farther away, countless people looked at the terrifying scene of the end of the world, and their legs became weak with fear. They gave up running away, children began to cry, lovers hugged each other tightly, and everyone hugged their families tightly. Shiki, you damn lunatic. Zhang Guo looked up at this scene, his eyes almost red and bursting, and he roared furiously. Ha 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 ha. Zhang Guo, this is my gift to you. The golden lion in the sky laughed almost crazily, and his bloody face became distorted because of his morbid desire for destruction. He looked down at the Navy Commodore with short black hair and laughed mockingly. Darren kid, did you see that? You destroyed my flying fleet, and today I will sink your Navy's headquarters into the sea. Ha 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 ha. You just watch helplessly and hopelessly, and everything will be destroyed in an instant. Boom boom. As the golden lion removed the control of the floating fruit on the floating island, in the heavy under the action of force, the speed of the island's fall gradually began to accelerate. The deafening roar became sharper and sharper, like an explosion that pierced the clouds and cracked the rocks. From the ground, you can clearly see circles of white air waves spreading at the bottom of the island, and then gradually began to emit red light. That was the temperature rise caused by the friction between the island and the air. The surging hurricane suddenly rolled down from the sky, and the ground under the feet began to show signs of cracking. The strong wind swept through every corner of Marineford, rolling up the wide white cloaks of the Navy generals. Everyone stood there like a sculpture, as if they had completely accepted the impending destruction. Just at this moment. What are you doing? A cold and hoarse shout suddenly exploded. Everyone was stunned, and saw Sakazuki holding the collapsed building wall with one hand and slowly standing up. He raised his hand to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth, his eyes were not shaken at all, staring coldly at the island that fell from the sky. Sitting and waiting to die is not the style of the Navy. He threw down a sentence coldly, and then took a deep breath. Puff puff. The two arms once again emitted billowing black smoke, and the extremely hot red magma suddenly expanded. Sakazuki stood up with his head held high, and under the stunned eyes of everyone, his fists blasted out like a storm. Boom boom boom. Like stray rockets, large groups of magma fireballs sprayed up crazily, and the dazzling red light dyed the sky dark red, and also illuminated Sakazuki's back as cold and hard as a cliff. Meteor volcano. Countless magma fire rains burst at the bottom of the island, resulting in a continuous explosion, and the flames spread out in large groups. With a terrifyingly powerful move, the magma fire rain penetrated the rocks in the bottom layer, and a large amount of rubble and soil burned and fell to the sea surface, emitting sizzling white smoke. The island's fall was obviously slowed down a little. It works. Attack together. Damn it. Everyone move. Otherwise we will really die here. The Navy's eyes lit up. Fire. Zhang Guo roared furiously at this time. The Navy was shocked, and then forced their tired bodies to move quickly. They came to the gun platform in a flash, dragged out various heavy artillery from the armory, and then frantically fired at the falling island in the sky. The number of heavy artillery is limited, and other navy without artillery just raised their guns and fired, regardless of whether it was useful or not. The Navy generals who mastered the 6 styles and swordsmanship did their best to perform long-range attack moves such as storm kicks and flying slashes, trying to hinder and slow down the island's fall as much as possible. The dense attacks exploded at the bottom of the island, blowing away large pieces of rocks, but compared to the huge scale of the island itself, it was a drop in the bucket. Damn it! This is useless. Kaji panted and kicked out a storm kick. After the slashing air waves sank into the bottom of the island, it only blew up some dust from a distance, giving people the feeling that it was as if a small stone was thrown into the endless sea, which could not cause any waves at all. Despair once again appeared in the eyes of the Navy generals. Don't give up. Huo Shaoshan slashed out flaming slashes one after another, his forehead was covered with cold sweat, his face was extremely pale, as if he had reached his limit. Dion swung his famous sword, and the golden sword light rushed out. His pale face was full of stubbornness. The palm of his hand holding the sword was already torn and his arm was shaking. Facing the fall of the island, everyone tried their best to launch an attack, but they could only slightly slow down the speed of the island's fall, and could not reverse the fate of the final hell. Under the power of this natural disaster, their desperate resistance was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. In less than half a minute, many people fell to the ground. After the previous war, most of them were already exhausted and could not support a long-term high-intensity burst. Haha, it's useless. Human power can't resist such a disaster at all. Golden Lion laughed even more wildly when he saw the stupid and naive actions of the Navy below. Please be grateful for everything. Chapter 258 The Knife That Penetrates the Island. The explosion sound of the friction between the island and the air became more and more sensational, almost shattering people's eardrums. The heavy pressure of the air spread, and the ground of the Navy headquarters even began to show signs of tearing. The wind was miserable. Everyone was still trying their best to launch the attack, gritting their teeth, and the cannons and swords were slashing like a rainstorm, falling madly at the bottom of the island. But the harder they fought, the more despair they had in their eyes, and the light in their pupils gradually dimmed. The island was too large, and even if everyone gathered their strength, they could only break a layer of rock at the bottom, and could not stop it from falling. What was most horrifying and despairing was that because of the size of the island, its falling speed was not as amazing as that of a meteorite, but instead gave people a sense of tension that a storm was about to come. This kind of oppressive feeling that made them breathless, the powerlessness of knowing that they would die but could not change the situation, was the most tormenting to human will. A silent despair gradually spread across the land of Marineford. Damn, I haven't become an admiral yet. How can I die here? Kuzan gritted his teeth, trying to stand up from the ground with difficulty, but staggered and knelt on one knee again, with blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. He had grown up much shorter than Sakazuki and the others, and his physical strength and physical recovery were not as good as the latter, not to mention the Ice Age that he had not yet fully mastered during the previous battle. With the heavy burden and serious injuries, his body had already reached its limit and was close to the edge of collapse. On the other side, Zhongguo had already transformed into a huge golden war Buddha. The golden Buddha's palm was wrapped in magnificent power, constantly blasting out vast shock waves in the air. Every impact caused the air to explode and blasted a deep pit at least 100 meters at the bottom of the island, but because of the distance, his attack power was weakened by half. Even though Zhongguo was the admiral of the Navy headquarters, facing this scene, a deep sense of powerlessness appeared in his bloodshot eyes. His devil fruit ability has never been good at covering a large area of attack. Although the animal-type mythical beast species can grant the ability holder all kinds of incredible abilities, it is still the animal type that enhances the ability of flesh fighting. Close combat is the strength of the warring states. Facing the rogue attack method of the Golden Lion, he is helpless. So, it seems that we will all die here this time. In the ruins of the collapsed building, Borsellino sat there and grinned without any manners. He glanced at Sakaski, who was still blasting magma fists not far away. The latter's face had become paler and blood was flowing from the corners of his mouth. He smiled and shook his head, and finally set his eyes on Darren. "So, do you have any solution?" Darren, who had not spoken since the floating island appeared, paused. He was silent for a moment, then suddenly smiled. "You don't look worried, Borsellino." Borsellino shrugged, looking relaxed, and said with a half-smile. "Although the Golden Lion's move is indeed terrible, I am a Flash man. I can't die." Darren laughed dumbly. "Yes, you can't die." The roar above his head became more and more violent, the sky seemed to be torn apart, and the ground was covered with violent winds. "With your ability, if you want, you can leave at any time, and you can't die," Borsellino said with a playful look in his eyes. Darren fell silent again. His military uniform was stained red with blood, tattered, his face was covered with blood, and his body seemed to be crumbling. He raised his hand tremblingly, took out a pack of wrinkled cigarettes from his arms, took out a cigarette from the cigarette box, bit it in his mouth and lit it. The choking smoke hit his throat, constantly irritating his trachea and lungs. Unconsciously, Darren's observation hockey perception had already opened and spread out. Pictures flashed through his mind like photos. He saw civilians kneeling in a pool of blood, screaming, wailing, and crying. He saw familiar faces forcibly holding on and attacking. He saw Admiral Sengoku and Teacher Zephyr with eyes about to burst. He saw Cake, Huo Shaoshan, Ghost Spider. He saw Tianyu Toki standing in the crowd with his hands clasped together and his eyes slightly red, looking in his direction. "Darren, if you have any way, use it quickly." At this time, Sengoku's roar suddenly interrupted Darren's flying thoughts. He stared at the figure of the Commodore with red eyes, and a hint of pleading flashed in his frosted eyes. Faced with such a desperate disaster, Sengoku racked his brains but couldn't think of any way to break the deadlock. Although this sounds ridiculous, for some reason, Zongguo always feels that if it is Darren, he must have a way. Countless missions in the past have proved this point. Zongguo's voice instantly attracted the attention of others. The Navy turned their heads in unison, and their eyes focused on the Commodore at the same time. "Ha ha ha ha. Stop kidding." Golden Lion naturally heard Zongguo's voice and couldn't help laughing sarcastically. "This is the power to destroy the world. No one can resist it. Just accept the reality. Marineford will sink into the sea today." His face was full of twisted and crazy smiles. "There is nothing more intoxicating in the world than this picture in front of you." Looking at these tens of thousands of naval elites, completely collapsed in despair and fear, and then buried in the sea. Thinking about that picture for a while, Golden Lion was so excited that he trembled all over. As for Darren the brat, I guess it's hard for him to stand, right? He stared at Darren with a playful look on his face, blood on his arms dripping down his two swords. If he really had any method, he would have used it long ago, ha 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 ha. The voice of the Golden Lion fell like a ghost, making all the Navy feel like being struck by lightning. They stared at the figure of the Commodore in a daze, their movements gradually slowed down, and finally they even stopped attacking. Is there really no way out? Will all of us die here today? Huh. At this moment, Darren suddenly exhaled a long dragon-like smoke from his mouth. In the wind filled with smoke and blood, he suddenly smiled. "I haven't moved, just want to recover some physical strength." When these words came out, the Navy was stunned. Golden Lion was also stunned. Darren turned his head to look at Borsellino and asked with a smile. "So that experiment is completed?" A glimmer of interest flashed under Borsellino's sunglasses. "It should be almost done." "Very good." Darren looked up at the pirate in the sky, his expression was unexpectedly calm, and his calm eyes hid a rebellious and fiery madness. "Yan Mo." He raised his hand. Suddenly, a sharp and strange black light broke out from the ground in the distance, and instantly came to Darren at an unimaginable speed. The three-petal blade, the blade was cold black, and the blade was branded with purple-black flame patterns. A solemn and bloody smell spread out instantly. Without Darren making any move, this sharp and unmatched famous sword slowly shifted, and the tip of the blade pointed directly at the huge island falling in the sky. The golden lion narrowed his eyes, and then couldn't help but sneered. So you tried to recover your strength, and you wanted to use that way of controlling metal to let this sword penetrate this island. Ha 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 ha, it's so stupid. He had seen Darren perform similar moves. The power of that move was indeed good, but it was far from enough to completely defeat this island. Darren didn't speak. He stood in the ruins of raging wind and falling rubble, with the blood-stained cloak of justice fluttering behind him. Boom! The magnetic field suddenly rioted and boiled, and Yanmo suddenly shot out from the spot, breaking the sound barrier in an instant, exploding circles of white air waves. Like a sharp black light, this world-famous demon soared into the sky. Ha 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 ha. Impossible. This kind of power is absolutely impossible. The grin of the golden lion stopped abruptly. As if he sensed something, his face suddenly changed, and his pupils contracted tightly. Zhongguo and Zepha were also stunned. At this time, the indifferent voice of the Commodore of the Navy echoed on the battlefield. It is undeniable that you do have the power to destroy the world, Golden Lion. A fierce arc rose at the corner of Darren's mouth. So. Only the power to destroy the world can fight you. He clenched his fists and his eyes were fixed. Shoot it, Yanmo. As soon as the words fell. Under the incredulous gazes of countless Navy men. Under the dumbfounded expression of the Golden Lion. The Yanmo that soared into the sky, instantly doubled in size by dozens of times. The original sword length of Yanmo was nearly 2 meters, but it suddenly became larger and longer, turned into a giant sword about 5 meters wide and 100 meters long. What's even more incredible is that the speed of Yanmo's burst was also amplified by this magical power, and it suddenly increased from several times the speed of sound, to dozens of times the speed of sound. Momo, 50 times / island fall. Under the shocked eyes of everyone, Yanmo, who turned into a giant sword, rubbed against the air at high speed to produce amazing flames, like a flaming blade wielded by an invisible god, tearing the atmosphere. It suddenly penetrated the floating island that fell from the sky. Please give me everything. Thank you. Chapter 259 The Golden Generation, End of Volume 2. Swish. The 100-meter-long flaming giant sword pierced through the entire island without any hindrance. The tip of the blade pierced through the top of the island and blew up the rocks in the sky. The gloomy black ghost energy swirled around the huge blade of Yanmo, blending with the flames, and finally derived a black and purple ghost fire flame. The sword energy storm roared from the tip of the blade, smashing the heavy clouds in the sky into pieces and disintegrating continuously. The huge island also stagnated its falling momentum because of this knife, as if it had fallen into stagnation. The Golden Lion's grim smile instantly solidified on his face, and dense bloodshot instantly filled the area around his pupils, and his eyeballs almost popped out of his eye sockets. This, a knife that almost pierced through the sky. Time seemed to freeze at this moment. On the land of Marineford, hundreds of thousands of civilians and sailors were stunned and shocked. They couldn't believe their eyes, couldn't believe what they saw. That huge floating island that covered the sky was actually pierced through by this sword. That purple-black giant sword that almost connected the sky and the earth looked like a pillar of heaven from a distance, guarding this holy land of justice. Such a shocking scene is destined to be deeply imprinted in everyone's mind and will never be erased. What is this? Zeph stared at the huge sword with a dull face, and couldn't help looking at the warring states not far away. But the latter also looked stunned, and clearly didn't know what was going on. Darren he knew that he had a demon sword from Wano country in his hand. Zhongguo just thought that this was a gift from the mysterious woman Tianyu Shi to Darren, so he didn't pay too much attention to it. He just felt that it was a bit of a waste for Darren, who didn't know swordsmanship, to have this sword in his hands. But even if it was a demon sword, it was just a special weapon. How could such a strange change suddenly occur when it was a dead thing without life? Wait. Zhongguo suddenly remembered another thing. He remembered that not long ago, the Navy Science and Technology Department led by Borsellino seemed to have said that it had made some technological breakthroughs about devil fruits from Dr. Vegapunk, who was 500 years ahead of the times. Borsellino also responsibly reported the relevant situation to himself, the Admiral of the Navy, saying that Dr. Vegapunk had cracked the conditions for the ability conversion of the devil fruit and developed a new technology. Let the dead thing eat the devil fruit and gain the ability of the devil fruit. At that time, Zhongguo was not impressed by this new technological breakthrough, and even sneered at it. What kind of bullshit technology is this? These were his original words. Of course, this does not exclude the fact that he had a preconceived impression of Borsellino, a guy who was not on the right track, as unreliable. Let a dead thing eat a devil fruit. What a joke. Devil fruits are extremely precious, and even the Navy can't produce too many. If there are powerful devil fruits, wouldn't it be a better choice to let people eat them? After all, people are alive, and as their strength grows, they can continuously develop devil fruits into more powerful ones. But now, looking at the huge demon sword that pierces the island in front of him, Zhongguo couldn't help but twitch his mouth, and the answer to the question was about to come out. What kind of ability is this? Is it Commodore Darren's devil fruit ability? No, it's not. It seems to be the ability of the sword itself. How is this possible? The Navy also quickly recovered from their shock at this time and looked at Darren in disbelief. This sword can actually grow bigger. Kuzan looked at Yan Mo, who penetrated the sky and earth, with shining eyes, turned his head and said to Darren with stars in his eyes. Darren, this is so cool. Sakazuki also looked surprised. Darren smiled, and his face looked weaker. Finally, it succeeded. He found the best destination for the Momo fruit. Yan Mo. If possible, it would be better to give the Momo fruit to a powerful person to eat. But in the short term, Darren did not find a suitable candidate. And he was already a magneto-magnetic fruit ability user, and it was impossible for him to eat two devil fruits at the same time. Until not long ago, Borsellino came to him and brought him an interesting news. Vegapunk successfully cracked the conditions for the transmission of the devil fruit. So an extremely bold, even crazy idea suddenly flashed through Darren's mind. Let Yan Mo eat the Momo fruit. Similar to Spandam's knife that ate the elephant fruit in the original plot, Yan Mo who ate the Momo fruit will also have the ability to double. And the most important point is that this does not require Darren's physical strength. It only takes a little physical strength to use the magnetic sword to shoot Yan Mo at a speed that breaks the sound barrier. Yan Mo can rely on the power of the Momo fruit to instantly multiply the size and speed by dozens of times, reaching a terrifying power that can destroy a town or even penetrate an island with one blow. Perhaps, this is the most ideal way to use the Momo fruit. Then, it's time to end. Darren grinned at the golden lion. I'm sorry, you lost in the end. Shua. A ray of blue electric arcs flashed across the huge blade of Yan Mo. Then, in the eyes of the golden lion, it seemed as if an invisible god swung the blade of doom heavily and slashed it down. Crack. Tear. The sound of the island tearing apart made people's scalps numb and spread throughout Marineford. With a loud bang, the world-famous peerless demon sword suddenly shattered the floating island and the thick sea of clouds in the sky. The island split into two parts from the center, and then continued to disintegrate in the process of falling in the air, turned into fragments all over the sky, and continued to fall into the vast sea on both sides of the Marineford Island. Amid the rumbling vibration, a huge amount of seawater rushed up into the sky, setting off a tsunami over 100 meters high, which kept surging and spreading, destroying the military port and the artillery, and was frozen by Kuzan who recovered in time. The few island fragments fell on the land of Marineford like small meteorites, dragging fiery red flame tails, like meteors in the sky. Buildings were constantly smashed to pieces, flames ignited in the city, and the sea of fire spread. But compared with the doomsday brought by the fall of the entire island, all this seemed insignificant. After doing all this, Yan Mo quickly shrank and flew back to Darren. The golden lion gritted his teeth and stared violently at the Commodore on the ground who was looking at him defiantly. But at the moment when he clenched his double swords and prepared to attack. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Several figures appeared in front of Darren almost at the same time, protecting him firmly in the center like a moon surrounded by stars. Sakaski, Kuzan, Borsellino, Zhongguo, Zepha. Golden Lion's movements suddenly froze. Blood flowed from the corner of Darren's mouth, and he sneered at him disdainfully. "What's wrong, do you need me to take you a ride?" After the voice fell, Yanmo beside him turned again, and the tip of the knife pointed at Golden Lion from a distance. The latter's pupils shrank. HMPH. Golden Lion put the two swords back into the scabbard, and suddenly laughed sinisterly. "I'll accompany you here today. Darren kid, we haven't settled our accounts yet. Ha 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 ha." He laughed loudly, his figure flew up, and soon disappeared behind the clouds. Seeing Golden Lion leave, Zhongguo and others secretly breathed a sigh of relief. The wind was fierce, and flames were burning on the ground. The fragments of the island kept breaking through the sky, shining like meteors. A golden dawn gradually bloomed from the sky cut by Yanmo, like the golden finger of a giant, slowly reaching into the earth. The warm sun was like golden sand, spreading on the devastated land, collapsed buildings and ruins of military fortresses, and also reflected on every scarred navy. They clenched their fists, their hearts surging. "We protected our home," someone murmured. The sun gradually became stronger. Dawn fell. The darkness dissipated. Young faces bathed in the sun, although tired and hurt, they couldn't help but smile at each other. Kuzan, Kaji, Guion, Huo Shaoshan, Ghost Spider, Doberman, Dalmesia, Stalaberry. They supported their bodies and couldn't help looking at the tall figure. The Commodore stood in the center of the crowd and smiled at them. It was dazzling. Swish. Kuzan, whose face flushed with excitement, could no longer hold back, and suddenly raised his hand to salute the figure. Following closely was Huo Shaoshan. The third. The fourth. The Navy men saluted the figure from afar one after another without anyone's order. Tisk, he stole the limelight. Kaji wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth indignantly, and then, under Guion's fierce glare, he shrank his head and raised his hand to salute. "This is really a touching scene." Borsellino smiled. Sakaski was silent for a while, and also raised his hand to salute. Zeph and Sengoku looked at each other, with a relieved and proud smile on their faces, and took 2 steps back and saluted at the same time. At this moment, no one in the entire Navy headquarters lowered their arms. Except that one person. He stood on the top of a ruin, covered in blood, biting a long burned cigarette in his mouth, but his body seemed to be bathed in 1,000 brilliant suns. In the year 1493 of the Sea Circle calendar, the legendary pirate, Flying Admiral, Shiki the Golden Lion, after the flying fleet was annihilated, joined forces with the great pirates Kaido and Charlotte Linlin to invade the Navy headquarters, Marineford, in order to retaliate against the Navy. With the power to destroy the world, the Golden Lion almost sank the Navy headquarters into the sea. This shocking battle resulted in the destruction of most of Marineford. It is worth mentioning that due to the absence of the Navy's legendary combat power, the young generation of Navy trained by the former Navy Admiral, Black Arm, Zephyr played a pivotal role in this battle. The unyielding will and strong strength they showed shone like stars in this era, and were as convincing and charming as gold. Among the golden stars, the brightest one is naturally the King of the North Sea, named Rogers Darren. After this battle, the combat power of the younger generation of the Navy grew rapidly and became the mainstay of the positive forces in the world and the future. Later historians called this group of Navy with the tenacious belief of Golden Will. Golden Generation. World Economic News Agency, President Morgans. The second volume, Golden Age, is finished. Today's more than 8,000 words, not short, please support me, thank you.